Raise your hand. All right. You're good people. How many of you prefer white meat? All right, you're all turkeys in my book, all right? I'm just kidding. Uh, honestly, I would rather go to Thanksgiving with you because it leaves more dark meat for me. So, hey, my name is Kent Wagner. I hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. I'm the senior pastor here. If you have not filled out that connection card, I would remind you again to fill that out, and you can drop that in the offering later on. We're at the end of the series here to there. Next week we'll start our Christmas series, which I'm really excited about. Be sure to invite some friends to come to that. I was thinking about the idea of paradoxes. Do you guys know what a paradox is? Some of you are like, that's my spouse. They're a paradox. I don't understand them. It's two seemingly contradictory things that when you really investigate, they kind of seem to be true. So I was looking up paradoxes, and I found some things that I thought were kind of funny, so I wanted to share those with you. So this is the first one: sign not in use. All right. So the paradox is the sign is in use, but it's not in use, all right? I don't know what it gets me every time I read that one. These all just kind of made me chuckle when I read them. So you can look at your neighbor and say, that was funny, all right? This one, the sentence at the bottom is true. The sentence at the top is false, all right? That one will get you going for like, which one is true? I don't know. They both, all right. So paradox, right? Here's the next one. This one, I'll read it to you. It's kind of hard to read for you guys. My nose will grow now, says Pinocchio. And then the paradox is, if he says it will grow, but it doesn't, he's lying. But it grows when he lies, so he would be telling the truth, but his nose still grew while he told the truth. So he'd be telling the truth, but it's a lie. I don't know. That one confuses me a little bit. All right, this one really got me. DiGiorno. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno, but it's a delivery truck, right? So how do they get it there? Delivery just, I don't know what to do. My brain is going to explode. All right, this one really got me. Do not touch hot, and then it has Braille. See that? Can you imagine the poor blind person who's like, ah! Oh man, I chuckled in my office for like 20 minutes over that one. Paradoxes are kind of crazy, right? There are these ideas that they're two separate ideas that seem to be in contradiction to each other, but really, when you investigate them, they hold true. And Christianity, if you don't know, is a faith of paradoxes. Our faith is bound up in all of these different paradoxes. We actually have a list of them, I think. Is that right? So we see unseen things. We conquer by yielding. We find rest under a yoke. A yoke was an implement that they used on animals to do work. And Jesus said, come to me and take my yoke upon you and you'll find rest, right? A weird idea that you would find rest by taking up somebody's yoke. We reign by serving. There's a few more here. We are made great by becoming small. If you want to be the greatest, you have to become the least. We're exalted when we are humbled. We become wise by being fools for Christ's sake. We are made free by becoming bondservants. There's all these ideas in Christianity that are these different, there's a bunch more. We could go through a bunch, right? That there are a bunch of ideas that are these things that seem to be contradictory. Jesus was the king of the paradox. I mean, he just all the time gave these two things that were two truths that would stand side by side. And when you just, Jesus says that there is this way that if you find your life, if you think you've got life all figured out, then you've lost it. But when you lose your life for my sake, when you give up your life for my sake, that's when you find it. And some of you who are Christians in here today, who have already found your way back home to God, you go, I totally get it. A few years ago, I would have been confused by that statement, but now I get it, that I've lost my life to him, and now I've actually found true life through him. The Christian faith is full of these paradoxical statements. I want to take you to one today, because we've been here to there. This series has been about learning kind of some God's financial wisdom for us. And how should we, if you're a Christ follower, how should you think about your finances and use it? And so today I want to take you to another paradox that's a financial one, and we'll kind of close up this series with this. We're going to go again to 1 Timothy 6. If you didn't pick this up all month long, we've been studying 1 Timothy 6, all right? So 1 Timothy 6, we're going to be looking at 17 through 19. Now we studied 17 last week, so I'm going to kind of leave it alone. If you want to hear that one, go find our podcast on iTunes or on Google Play Store, and you can pick up last week's podcast. I'd encourage you to do that anyway, just so when you're driving, you can listen to encouraging messages and be challenged. You can jump on those. But here's the passage. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. It says this: command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, right? That's what we talked about last week. Don't put your hope in your wealth. Don't put your hope in your riches. Put your hope in God. And if you remember, we just gave example after example. We had a testimony time where people came up and just shared how God had been their hope and what that was like. He says, God, put your hope in God, who richly provides us everything for our enjoyment. And then verse 18, command them. So again, he's talking about rich people. And we've established over this month that if you have more than one meal to eat each day, that you are rich by the world's standards. I know by American standards that doesn't probably make you rich. It doesn't feel like you're rich a lot of times. But by the world's standards, if you can feed yourself and your family one meal a day, you are rich. Most of us live better than kings lived. Not anymore, but back in the day. He says this to the rich people, us, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. This is where the paradoxical idea comes in. In this way, he says, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Now, at first glance, it doesn't feel like this is a paradox. But what he's doing is he's describing something that Jesus asked us to do. Do you remember this? Jesus said, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. He says, moth and rust, they'll come and they'll take those things away. And it's what Paul is literally in 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. He is really preaching a sermon where he is outlining what Jesus said. He's kind of taking that and he's making it into kind of commentary for us. And he says, don't put your trust in the things of this world and the earthly riches because they're so uncertain. Put your trust in God. Remember, Jesus said, don't store up treasures in heaven, on earth because moth and rust will get them. And then Jesus goes on to say, store up treasure in heaven. And Paul is telling us now how you actually go about storing up treasure in heaven. And this is what he's saying, is that the route to true riches is to pour out now to store up for them. It's to pour out now so that you can store up for them. It is really that the idea, this is where the paradox comes, is that you give so that you can get, right? It is this idea that the more that I pour out, the more that I'll get. And again, it's not necessarily that you'll get financial reimbursement from God. It's that there is this, you are storing up treasures in heaven. Does that make sense to you? This is, I have one of my professors from college from years ago. He's now a pastor in a church. He put this on Twitter, and I saw it, and I thought it was a really, really good little thing. It says, God doesn't put his blessings into buckets, but in funnels. If you were blessed, it's not because God loves you, but because he trusts you to love someone else. Think about that for a moment. God doesn't put that blessing inside of you to be a bucket, for you to just hold that blessing in yourself and for it to just be for you. It is so that you could become a funnel of God's love in this world. And God puts that blessing inside of you because he trusts you to love someone else. Now, don't think he's saying that God doesn't love you. He's just saying he didn't give it to you just because he loves you. He gave it to you so you can pour that blessing into somebody else's life. That, if you would take just that idea for a moment, because I think it embodies what Paul is trying to say. It embodies this paradox of the faith, that if you give, you get. If you would take that for a moment and let that really affect the paradigm of how you think about your wealth, how you think about your finances, how you think about your faith. If you would actually let those things intersect in this moment, it would change how you do everything. That you would say, I am no longer, I don't view my life as this bucket that I'm trying to fill up as much as I can. I'm trying to store up as much as I can for myself. Instead, I am a funnel that God is funneling things through. There are 4 funnel commands that Paul gives us to the rich, those of us who are rich. These are the 4 funnel commands. He says to do good. He says to be rich in good deeds. He says to be generous. And he says to be willing to share. Now, I could spend the next 10, 15 minutes trying to tell you what those things mean. But the reality is you guys are pretty smart, right? Most of you finished the 3rd grade. So you know what it means to do good. Yeah, you've had some teacher at some point say, hey, you need to be nice to little Johnny over there. Most of you know being rich in good deeds. I like that idea that if you're going to be wealthy in how you treat other people, right? To be generous. You know what it means to be generous, to give away money, to help other people. You know what it means even to be willing to share. Anybody graduate kindergarten? I mean, you made it through, right? You've had somebody tell you and teach you what it means to share. The struggle for most of us is, how do I practically put this into place? How do I practically put these ideas into place? Because if you're like me, you're somebody who looks at the world kind of with a critical eye. We got this call the other day from the sheriff's fundraising team. Does anybody get those calls where they're, I'm just calling for some sheriff somewhere, and we're ready, and you're like, what sheriff who are you? Do you live in my county? And you know that, and you, if you're like me, you're critical of those kinds of things, right? You look at them with a little bit of kind of a disdain, and you think, I don't know about that, right? That's kind of how most of us operate. It's kind of our if you see somebody standing outside of Sam's in Joplin and they've got a homeless sign, some of you either go one way or the other. Your heart just bleeds for them, and you're like, and you give them all your money, and you've got some food that you bought for yourself to eat for lunch, and you give them your food. And then others of you drive by, and you're like, get a job, right? And you're like, you're either one or two of those things, and most of the time, they're married to each other, right? So that we balance each other out, yeah? This morning, what I want to do, because I think it is a difficult thing to understand, how do we actually, in this world where so many people are trying to take advantage of us, and so often it's difficult to know the right thing to do. I wanted to, just for a moment, look at 4 different biblical principles of how to be generous. And you will notice in some of these that we are going to intentionally, as Christians, allow ourselves to be taken advantage of, all right? So just be prepared, because some of this is going to shock your pants off if you haven't read it before, all right? So if you guys, in front of you, there should be pads of paper, some pencils. Grab one of those, write these down, 4 biblical principles of being generous. Go later on and study these passages. Actually think about, I wonder, this week, in your time with God, take these passages and look at, am I living these things out in my life? Here's the first one. First principle of biblical generosity is that everyone can do this. Everyone can do this. God is looking for the faithful, not the fully funded. God is looking for people who are faithful, not people who have a really full bucket, if you want to put it in a different way. All right? So this means even if you are poor and you have no money and you don't know how you're going to make it next month, and you're thinking, Kent, I want to be generous, but until I win the lottery, or until I spin the thing at the ding, 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 and all 3 cherries line up, until that happens in my life, I am never going to be able to be generous. If that's you, I want you to hear today, right here and now, that everyone can do this. And I would even add to this, I thought about this morning, I almost think it should be everyone can and should do this. Everyone can be generous. Jesus told this story. It's one of my favorite passages. Matthew 25, Jesus is telling this story about this master who's going to go away. And he's a really wealthy man. If you've ever known somebody who's super wealthy, I mean, the guy just has money coming out of his ears. And this master is leaving, and he goes up and he says to one of his managers, he says, look, guy, I'm taking off. Here's the deal. I've got 5 bags of gold I want to give you, all right? Anybody would love to get 5 bags of gold just dumped in your lap? Yeah, okay, thanks. None of you raised your hand? Fine. Give me your 5 bags of gold. I will love it. I appreciate it. He dumps 5 bags of gold in the guy's lap. Some of you know this story so well. Another guy, he goes to another manager, and he says, hey, I got some gold. I'm going to leave it with you. I've got some business. Take this, do something with it. Gives him 2 bags of gold. The next guy he goes to, the next manager on the list, gives that guy 1 bag of gold, and the master goes off and goes and does his business. He comes back sometime later, and he meets with the guy who got 5 bags of gold, and he sits down. I can picture it. Jesus doesn't do it this way, but I can picture him behind his big oak desk, the manager, and he's sitting down. He's got a pencil in his ear and pulls it out, and he's that boss who like listens, but he's really like doing paperwork while he's listening because he's just got so much to do, And this boss is sitting there, and the guy with the 5 bags of gold comes in and, hey, master, how was the vacation? Oh, it was great with my wife, we did on the beach. So tell me what'd you do with that 5 bags of gold I gave you? And he's doing his paperwork, and he's signing stuff and writing it up. And the guy is sitting there, he's kind of nervous, and he's, well, master, I took the 5 bags of gold, and I took it all, and I invested it, and I'll tell you what, I did good in the stock market for you. We took the 5 bags of gold, and I made another 5 bags of gold for you. I can picture the master looking up and going, oh, good job. And he kind of keeps going. And the guy's like, all right, I doubled your investment. The guy with the 2 bags of gold comes in, and he starts talking to him. And this is Kent's interpretation of it. You should go read Matthew 25, right, to get how Jesus actually told the parable. But he comes in, and he's 2 bags of gold, and tell me what you did with yours. He's signing it, giving, secretaries over here taking the papers. And he says, well, I took your 2 bags of gold. I invested them too, and I doubled your money too. I got another 2 bags of gold. Hey, good job, buddy. You did good. The guy with the one bag of gold comes in, and he's nervous. This is his first time out of the gate. The master's finally entrusted him, and he's kind of nervous, but he's excited because he thinks he does a good job. And he sits down, and the master's sitting there behind the desk, and he's writing, and all this. And the guy says, "Master," and he said, "Oh yeah, tell me, how'd it go with the one bag of gold?" And the guy says, "Well, Master, I knew that you were a harsh master, that you took from where, like, if you would take wheat out of fields that you didn't sow. I knew that you just take things that aren't yours, and you're harsh, and you try to squeeze every penny out of every dollar that you get." And he says, "So I took that one bag of gold that you gave me, I dug a hole in my backyard, and I buried it. Here's your bag of gold back." Are they good, right? And the master looks at him. He says, "You wicked servant. You wicked servant. Wait, you know that I'm a harsh man. You know that I take seed out of fields that I didn't even plant. You know that's the kind of master that I am. And so you took this one bag of gold and you put it in the ground, and you think coming back to me with the single bag of gold that I gave you is good enough?" He says, "You could have just put it in the bank and at least got a little interest off of it, right? You just hid it. You just buried it. You didn't do anything with it." And this is what the master says, Matthew 25, 29 through 30. It says, "For whoever has will be given more." Because the master actually takes the bag of gold from the guy and gives it to the guy who had doubled his money. He takes it and he says, "Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And this is what happens to the guy with the one bag. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Listen to this. God is not interested in what you didn't have. Like on the day that you stand before him, he's not going to be interested in what you didn't have. He's not going to be interested in you standing there going, "God, we didn't have like thousands of dollars in the bank account. God, we didn't have tons of extra food sitting on our table. God, I didn't have lots of extra time all the time to do stuff for other people." He's not going to be interested in what you didn't have. Do you get this? This is what he's going to be interested in. He's going to want to know what you did with what you did have. What have you done with what you did have? You see, every single person can do this and should do this. You may not have the money to go out. We do this Christmas angel tree where there are families on a tree out there, their names are, and you can go and pick one of those families and you can buy them Christmas presents and shower their family with a lot of love, and that's an amazing thing to do. But you may sit in here every week and your heart breaks because you just don't have the finances and resources to even begin to do that. Think about it. You're struggling to think about how you're going to get Christmas for your family. You're in here going, I don't know how I'm going to put food on my family's table this year. I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills this year, Kent. And you want me to be more generous? And I think Jesus would say to you, why aren't you doing something with what you do have? Stop looking at the guy who has 5 bags of gold and saying, "If I had 5 bags, I would have done it. I'm just going to take the one bag that I have. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to bury it." I think he would say, "Why don't you do something with what I have given you?" Could you just write an encouraging note to somebody this Christmas season who you know is struggling because they've lost a spouse this year and it's going to be horrible for them. It's going to be hard and difficult. Could you not put one more place at your table, invite over a single person for Christmas this year, say, "Come sit at our table this year and enjoy Christmas with us"? You could probably afford to do that, couldn't you? You might not be able to buy a whole family Christmas presents, but you might be able to do that. Could you maybe you have no money, there's no extra, you don't have any extra. Could you not just start praying for a coworker who's struggling and just say, "I'm going to dedicate myself to pray for you every single day"? Why do we look at those who have and say, "Well, I just won't because I don't have"? Everyone can and should do this. God's not going to be worried someday about what you didn't have. He's going to wonder what you did with what you did have. Start today. Second one is this: be wise. This is the second biblical principle for being generous. You need to be wise. I'm going to boogie through these a little bit, all right? There's a book called When Helping Hurts. I may have mentioned it in here before, I don't know, but I haven't actually read it, just full disclosure, because if I can get everything out of a book from the title, I don't read it. So I felt like I got everything I needed to know out of this title. That there are times when we can help people. I've talked to people who read it, and my assumption was right. There are times that you can actually do something that seems like help for somebody, and it's actually hurting them. Yeah? Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? You give money to somebody who is chronically can never pay their bills. You're not actually helping them. What you're doing is putting a Band-Aid over a problem, right? That has a greater issue. And so helping is not always just doing the base level thing, and sometimes helping can actually hurt the way we think of it. I wanted to read you a passage from Jesus. This is Matthew 10:16. As we think about being wise as we are generous, Jesus says this: I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. He's about to send out his disciples to go and share the message of the kingdom of heaven is near with people. And this is what he says. He's telling them, you're going out among these people. They're like wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. It's one of my favorite passages because Jesus, if you could just for a moment take yourself out of, I've been in church for a long time and I've heard all these things before. If you could take yourself out of that for just a moment, when Jesus says you're shrewd as snakes, the old way, do you remember it used to say serpents? That's how they would change this, they would interpret that word was translated. That's the word I'm looking for. It wouldn't be snakes, it would be serpents. You know who the serpent was in the Bible? When we find a serpent in the Bible, it is Satan. Yeah? Go back to the Garden of Eden, and you have Satan there as a serpent, and he is tricking people, humanity, Adam and Eve, into sinning. And Jesus says to us, you need to be as shrewd as the devil. Take that for a moment. This religious guy, this guru, the guy who is our faith is based on, he says to you, you need to be as sharp as the devil is sharp with other people. But when you are in this moment, you also need to maintain, it is another paradox, you need to maintain the innocence of a dove. So don't grab on to all of the sinfulness of Satan. But Satan is sharp in the way that he deals with you, the way that he tries to entice you. You need to be as shrewd as a snake and innocent as a dove. Listen, if you're helping somebody and you're not sure if I'm helping or if I'm hurting, you need to think about this, that if what you're doing for a person enables them to continue to hurt themselves or others, you're not helping, you're hurting. If what you're doing enables them to hurt themselves or others, you are not helping them. My brother was a drug dealer. I've said this before, he wasn't the scary gangster drug dealer, he was the hippie drug dealer. And I remember the day that my parents kicked him out of the house because my brother was in college and he would come home one day and he'd have $500 in his pants. And the next day you'd say, Chip, what happened to that $500 in your pocket? And he'd say, oh, I dropped it in the urinal. And you're like, who drops $500 in a urinal, you know? He really was. It was just on drugs. That was the urinal that he was talking about. And I remember the day my parents kicked my brother out and said, we love you. You are welcome at our house as long as you're not going to be on drugs or dealing drugs. But until that day comes, you are not welcome here. See, some of us want to help even when it hurts. If you are enabling someone to continue in a lifestyle that hurts themselves or hurts others, you are not helping them. And this is hardest when it's those who are closest to us. It's easy to cut off the homeless guy at Sam's and say, well, if I were to help him, I'd just be hurting him because I'm just enabling them to stay homeless and not get a job, right? See, if you're on that side of it, if you're that person who is you're not the bleeding heart for people, but you have the hard heart towards people, you need to also pick up the whole innocent as doves piece. Because what I don't get is, we'll say that thing about it'd hurt them if we just gave them money and did. But why don't we ever ask the next question of what would actually help them? Why don't you ask that question? See, I'm not advocating that you don't help somebody. What I'm asking is that you ask the question of what would help them. You actually get to the point where you say, I'm not just going to do the easy thing of giving some cash or giving some money. I'm going to look at this and think of ways that I can help them. That's a more difficult thing. And that is a biblical principle of generosity. Here's the next two real quickly. Number 3. You need to be generous. Your generosity needs to be for an audience of one. Your generosity needs to be for an audience of one. Matthew 6:1-4, Jesus says this: be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Right? Don't do this act of generosity for others to be seen. And then if you skip down, verse 3 of that passage, he says, but when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. You don't even let your left hand know that your right hand is putting money in the offering, right? So that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. My grandpa Wagner was a really neat guy. He was like smooth bald on top, and he was very soft spoken, which is funny because in his early years he had been a boxer, and he was just a tough coot when he was a young guy. But when he was older, he was very soft spoken. One of my favorite things about Grandpa Wagner is he'd pull me aside, and in my ear he'd just whisper, "I love you." One of my favorite things about my grandpa was just him doing that to me and just sharing his love with me. Well, when my grandpa Wagner passed away, it was a pretty difficult thing. And I remember being at the funeral and my dad afterwards talking to us and saying, people kept coming up to me and saying how much, it was his dad, so how much my dad meant to them. And we were all talking as a family, and he said, what they told me was that Dad used to go and he would every year buy a coat for their family around Christmas time. And he would bring the coat because he knew that the family couldn't afford it, and he would give the coat to the family, and he just made sure that these kids were warm. They're all around the community. He said, just people were coming up to me left and right talking about all these things that Dad did, and I never even knew it. You know why? Because my grandpa wasn't really looking for rewards here on earth. He wasn't looking for accolades. He wasn't looking for somebody to give him an attaboy and to say how good he'd done and how great it was that he helped people. He had this genuine love for people, and his reward was an eternal reward. He was storing up treasures in heaven. I would ask you, when you do acts of generosity, to put aside your pride and your ego that wants to be rewarded for it here and now, and know that your Father in heaven sees it and that he will reward you someday. And his reward will be so much better. Do it for an audience of one when you give. And this is the last one. I would ask you to, this is the last biblical principle. Lend, this is one you're going to think I'm crazy. Are you ready? Look at your neighbor and say, Kent might be crazy, all right? Yeah, you can do that. Here we go. Lend without asking for anything in return. Look at your neighbor and now say, I think he really is crazy, all right? Lend without asking for anything in return. Now, in a moment, I'm going to kick it up a notch, all right? So just get prepared. You may be thinking Kent's crazy, but you're also probably thinking, Kent, can I have a loan? Right? Because he can't ask for anything in return. Let me just kick this one up a notch. Listen to what Jesus said, because I'm not the one who came up with this idea. This is Jesus. And if you read where the context of where he's saying this, Jesus takes it up to an even greater, like crazy level, like crazy number 5 on the craziness scale, all right? Here we go. Luke chapter 6, verse 35. Jesus says this. Look at the context of who he's talking about. But love your what? No, tell me, church, love your what? Enemies, right? These are the people you do not like. Yeah? Love them. Okay, Jesus, whatever. Yeah, sure. Love your enemies. Do what? Do good to them. Okay, Jesus, sure. Here's the thing. Here's what stuck out to me as I studied this passage. You can't really measure if somebody is loving their neighbor or doing good to them very easily, right? Those two things are not very measurable. I could tell you all day long, I love my enemy. I pray for him, oh baby. But you can't really know if I do, right? Here's the one where Jesus puts a measuring tool on it. And lend to them, to your enemies, without expecting to get anything back. What? Yeah? You might not have somebody that you think of as an enemy, but surely you have somebody you don't really care for, right? Maybe you have somebody. I see some people looking across the aisle there, Don and Nick. He was eyeballing you, Nick. You better watch out. You better ask him for a loan, Jack. There are people who fall under that category, right? Take the person that you don't like the very most in this world. And imagine Jesus saying to you, take person X, give them money, and don't ask for anything. Don't expect anything in return. Why does he say this? Look, then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. What he's saying is, when you do this, when you treat those that have been horrible to you and you don't like, those people that you have a hard time forgiving, that when the pastor does the sermon on forgiveness, in your head, that person comes up and you just go, I can't, pastor. I just can't do it. That's the person that Jesus wants you to give to them, to love them, to do good to them. And when you give them money, when they ask you for a loan, that you loan them money and you don't expect anything in return. Why? Because when you do this, you are embracing a picture of who your God is in this world. You are the most like your God in that moment because he was kind to you, even though you were ungrateful and you were wicked in your ways before you turned to Jesus. That is a powerful concept. That is where people start looking at you and they go, man, I want what that guy has. He's crazy. I don't know how he does it, but he has so much joy and he has so much peace. I want what she has because she has so much hope. And for some reason, money doesn't control her. She's in control of it. I want what they have. Christians, loan and give that money without expecting anything in return. If people do pay you back, that's great. That's fantastic. He doesn't say don't let people pay you back. What he is saying is when you do it, you better give it with the expectation that they may not do it and give it back to you. And that is okay. Because when you do that, you reflect God's love in this world. This is where it goes back to that whole innocent as a dove, but shrewd as a serpent thing. Yeah? It doesn't mean that you just give every single person money who comes up and asks you. It means that you're still wise about how you handle it because it might actually hurt them to give them that money. But when you help, you do it without expecting anything in return. I'll tell you, if that doesn't step on your toes a little bit, then you're not alive. You're not breathing. It's just step on your toes. See, there are some biblical principles that we have to embrace. I was thinking about all this, and I was preparing the sermon, and you've probably seen, I hope you've seen this video. Maybe you haven't, but there is a lady in our church, Nicole Johnson, who has a heart of gold. She loves people. She just has a love for people. It was a very genuine heart for people. And Nicole was in Walmart, I think probably getting ready for Thanksgiving. I don't really know. But she's in Walmart, and she came out, and she just did this video because something had really kind of broke her heart. And I wanted to share this video with you guys this morning, kind of as my closing, because I think she kind of embodies the idea of us being generous in a way that me coming up here and preaching 4 points to you can't embody. So you guys, just for a moment, give your attention. We'll turn the lights down low and watch this video.
Hey everyone, this is the second time I've tried to do this video because I can't do it without crying. But I wanted to get on here. I'm getting ready to pick up my daughter from school, and I just came from Walmart. And when I was checking out, there was a girl in front of me with a little baby, and she was taking some time, and I noticed nobody else was in line. I thought that was weird because it seemed like a short line, but then I realized she was paying with WIC checks. And nobody wants to wait behind you when you have those. And I just want to get on here, and when I was in line, I failed. I couldn't figure out how I could help her because all I had was checks, and she didn't have any extra groceries, which made it even harder because I knew the fact that she didn't have any groceries besides the WIC. Probably wasn't because she didn't want anything else. It was probably because she couldn't afford it. And I know this because I've been there. 6 years ago, I was that mom. And I want people to understand what WIC is. WIC is not just like welfare. It's not food stamps. It's healthy food, and you buy it for your kids with these checks, and you're only allowed to get certain foods. It has to be really healthy foods. We're talking like whole wheat bread and, stuff like that. It's a lot different than some people understand. And I can tell you from experience that there's nothing more humiliating than standing there in line and having to pay with WIC checks. And people say that some people like to say that these people that are on these are, just using the government and this and that. And they say, oh, Nicole, your circumstance were different, and your husband, he worked hard, and he did. He was working night shifts. some 12-hour shifts. He'd drive home. It was the hardest time of our lives. And the biggest blessing. I would not trade those days for nothing because I learned so much those days. I learned how to use our money wisely, and I learned how to shop wisely, and I learned about WIC, and I learned about people that struggled. And if there's any lesson in life to learn, that'd be something I'd want my kids to know about. So today I failed. I didn't have any cash on me, and I swear next time I'll figure out a way to help. But I just want to put this out there to explain to people, when you see a mom or dad or somebody in line with WIC checks, just please don't be rude. Be empathetic, don't judge a person. Just have a little bit of empathy. And I'm not saying you have to give them money if you don't want to. I'm just saying, just don't judge them. And if you do have money, I can't explain how much $20 goes to a person that has nothing. It would have bought her baby a Christmas present. It would have bought them a little more food. And I pray that God gives me another chance to help. And I pray that you guys do too.
I'd encourage you this week to make it your goal that you would do good, you'd be rich